One company was 400, and there was 4 companies in here, so it was 1,200 people in this camp. And it was a day like today, hot and humid.
Carl Blumenthal has returned to the Huntsville area. His mind's eye sees things as they were 46 years ago.
In my imagination, I see all those barracks and all those young people who used to be here and had our fun. And
Walter Janik strolls the Galveston shore, the shore he wistfully gazed at from afar 46 years ago.
I can still see, looking out here at Galveston at night, and see all the lights.
They share a common bond. Both men were German prisoners of war held in Oklahoma and Texas. Little has been told about their story. Up as the Allies fought through Europe. Many were sent to POW camps in Great Britain away from the fighting. By early 1943, the elite Africa Corps surrendered in North Africa.
No Nazi who wants to live would try to make a break now.
Rules governing the treatment of prisoners, the 1929 Geneva Convention, called for their internment in a climate similar to where they were captured. So the Africa Corps soldiers were shipped across the Atlantic Ocean and sent to Texas.
Texas generally had more camps and more prisoners than most other states.
Texas A&M historian Arnold Kramer has collected photos and researched details of the 120 POW camps that dotted the Texas countryside. All told, there were 80,000 prisoners.
Often the number of prisoners that were brought into a local community outnumbered the American inhabitants of those towns.
In the United States, the men are assigned to permanent prison camps scattered all over the country. Here, they are busily engaged in all types of useful work.
In Texas, many POWs volunteered to work the farms and harvest crops since most farm boys were all fighting overseas. The POWs were paid 80 cents a day to keep the Texas farm economy going.
80 cents went a long way in those years when you consider that a pack of cigarettes was 5 cents and a Coca-Cola was 5 cents.
Some of the prisoners were allowed to wander around downtown, perhaps in the company of their guards, and buy small items at the stores.
Prison camp canteens were well stocked for the POWs. They could even buy beer. And in many camps, they got more things to eat than were available through rationing for Texas civilians like Teresa Rohde.
They had all the sugar they wanted, they had all the butter they wanted, and ice cream, and they could buy cigarettes out there when the civilian could not buy them.
Brings back those memories, huh?
In fact, Carl Blumenthal, a former POW at a camp near Huntsville, looks back with fondness about his treatment.
I enjoyed it. I mean, I had my breakfast in the morning, I had my dinner, my stuff to eat, I had a bed to sleep, nothing to worry.
The war was over.
The war was over for me, it's just a guarantee.
In many cases, a wonderful time. Here's a picture of one of the 3 orchestras. This was at Camp Swift, Texas, in Bastrop, Texas. They had a wonderful time.
It struck me that how friendly and fair the Americans were.
Walter Catwinkle still has photos of the days he was a POW in a camp in Tyler, which he often revisits. He recalls how the attitudes of his Texas captors left an indelible impression on him.
Fierce independence in him, you know, but still being loyal to the government and to what the United States stands for, you know. That, to me, was the most wonderful thing. And I thought, man, that's the way man should live.
We were so careful to try to protect our prisoners in their hands that we gave them anything.
It sounds as if your research indicates we bent over backwards to make them happy and comfortable.
Yes, we did.
This almost coddled treatment was a deliberate U.S. attempt to improve conditions for Americans held prisoner in Germany.
We were a bit naive. We let this program unfold. It didn't help our prisoners overseas.
Old-timers in Hearne, Texas vividly remember the day 46 years ago when the long train pulled into town. It brought the first captured members of the Afrika Korps to Texas. Ken Johns, who still lives here, was an MP back then.
Some of them still wearing some of the bandages that they had on.
Gene Lawney was among the GIs who marched them off to camp.
I mean, you didn't know what to expect. We were naturally on guard. I rode in a little Jeep right in back of the last bunches they were marching out.
I'd seen quite a few war movies, and it struck me that these Nazis didn't quite look like the Hollywood version. For one thing, they weren't goose-stepping.
Of all the camps, the one at Hearne was the most notorious because of its Nazi activity. They managed to set up a unique communication and intelligence network here, and they kept in touch with other Nazis, even those back in Germany, by controlling the entire POW postal system. This is an old photo of the Hearne mailroom. Here, Nazi prisoners hoodwinked to understand the German language.
So those German prisoners who could worm their way into the mail room could find out who was writing to whom, who was being transferred from one camp to the other, who was a Nazi, who was an anti-Nazi.
The few remains of the Hearne camp are mute witnesses to episodes of repeated violence caused by the minority hardcore Nazis against non-Nazi prisoners. The guards say they were unable to prevent sudden riots and the brutal Nazi killing of a prisoner.
Beat him with pipe and cut his toes and fingers with razor blades.
They turned the radios on at night, and if anyone was screaming or yelling or hurting and pain, you couldn't hear them. They were really loud, them radios.
Nazi influence was even perpetuated by some U.S. POW. Hitler officially changed the German army salute.
The American Army will send a letter or a notification to all prisoner of war camps that the prisoners from now on had to salute an American officer with a Nazi salute, you know. I refused.
Nazis in the camp demanded a funeral, demanded Nazi flags, and so to protect our prisoners in their hands, we found them Nazi flags. And the funerals in most of the camps were really Nazi events.
Eventually, Nazi POWs were segregated in a special Oklahoma camp.
Here's what some prisoner drew up to escape with. He drew this by hand. Look at that seal.
POWs invented creative documents to try to fool authorities.
Well, he just made this up. Bureau of Foreigner, Austin, Texas. Drew that seal on by hand.
Even though some escapees put considerable distance between themselves and the camps, they were always recaptured.
Some got as far as Freeport on the Brazos River on rafts.
A few escaped prisoners tried to get shelter in well-known German-American communities in Texas. But people there did not help because they were especially sensitive about their heritage.
And realized that they had to be more patriotic than non-German citizens, and usually just beat the daylights out of these people and turn them over to the MPs. They were back in camp by nightfall.
I confess I made escapes myself 3 or 4 times, but that's more and more out of boredom because...
Walter Catwinkle recalls how he and some other POWs sneaked out of camp to go fishing in a nearby river.
When we were sitting there on a bank, you know, peaceful, the birds were singing, you know, and suddenly I look up and I see the MPs coming, you know. And I said, oh. And I hollered, hey, man, don't you dare shoot, you know.
I mean, this makes me goosebumps right now.
I'll bet it does.
Yeah.
It's like coming back in time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Revisiting Huntsville, Carl Blumenthal recalls sitting out the war at the camp near town. He met with Bob Smither, who helped set it up. They reminisced about the day Smither and the sheriff recaptured 2 escaped POWs who were wandering downtown Huntsville.
I got my pistol. We went. I gave it to the sheriff, and they were walking along. I drove up beside them, and the sheriff, all he did was just point to the back seat of the car. They jumped in.
Smithers still keeps the same old pistol in his office.
They had crawled through a drain out there at the camp.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. I show you that drain.
The drain pipes are still visible at the now deserted campsite.
But this is where they went out.
Did the guards go crazy looking for them?
Yeah. Everybody blames the other one for it. We were all put on for 3 days on water and bread as a penalty.
are scenes made from an Army training film about the handling of German POWs. It was made 45 years ago at Camp Bullis near San Antonio.
The first thing to do is to frisk them. A quick once-over, no time for a thorough search now.
With more German prisoners held in Texas than in any other state at the time, it's ironic none of them were used in this production.
You're a member of a Panzer unit.
06706.
Lieutenant, sir, I can make him talk.
None of that, soldier. His rights.
Playing the roles of and looking every bit like members of the Africa Corps was a military police company that was based in Houston.
The top thought in his mind is escape. So let him know that you know it.
How useful this old film was is open to conjecture. Today, it is an interesting artifact about this period in history, especially its message about the value of capturing prisoners.
We learn his positions, his plans, his strength, his weaknesses. We learn how to blast him off the face of the earth.
Had spent most of the war here when the fighting ended in Europe. Since the vast majority of them were not Nazis, American authorities decided to educate them about Hitler's horrors.
We felt that before we returned these prisoners back to Germany, they should be made aware of what their government had done in their absence. So we showed them. Many of the prisoners didn't believe it.
But the POWs did not return.
Prisoners in our hands were shipped to the French and to the British, and they were used to clean up the roads. They were almost as a slave labor program.
When I left the United States and being sent back, to come back here to see how the area looks like, took 46 years, but I made it.
Like a few other former POWs, Carl Blumenthal is fascinated to poke through the remains of his internment camp. It's located a few miles outside Huntsville. The stone front entrance still stands. It was built by the prisoners.
Good old field rocks. They were all cut by those guys.
Blumenthal walked briskly and excitedly through the old deserted camp, as if driven by some urgency.
This is the hospital. It's still standing. It's still there. I don't believe that. I can still see it in my eyes how it was.
Can you see the faces of the prisoners who were there, your comrades?
Some of them, yes.
Here, where the POWs would come to relax.
And we had a turtle about that big in there. And somebody made a German turtle out of it to put the Iron Cross on top of it.
Blumenthal still has the Africa Corps armband he wore on his uniform and the razor from the shaving kit he was issued as a POW.
And you wouldn't believe I use it. I still use it sometimes.
There were Germans and Japanese both at Kennedy. This is at Fort Sam Houston. They used furniture.
Historian Ida Blanchette is on a mission. For 10 years, she has crisscrossed more than 80 POW campsites. Her files are filled with photographs, documents, and anecdotes about that era.
I'd like to help all the places that had campsites to get historical markers for all of the campsites.
Mrs. Blanchette personally found the remains of the POW camp in Alvin. It was located outside town, and like other camps in the state, not everyone knew about it.
The government didn't even let them know that they were building prisoner of war camps there. There was a request by the government of the newspapers not to publish things like that about it.
Prisoners in Alvin worked in canneries and on irrigation canals for rice crops, crucial to the wartime economy.
Labor was very scarce. Most of the men were off at war, of course. And the rice crops were vital to the war effort, and that was one of the reasons that the government finally went ahead and placed the camp here.
It was one of the few camps allowed so close to the Gulf. That surprised Bill Corbett, who helped farmers hire POWs.
They figured that the government would object to letting the PWs be that close to the coast. That maybe a submarine or something would make the contact with them.
It was feared that escaped POWs could be rescued by German subs. Many U-boats operated in the Gulf off the Texas-Louisiana coast. They torpedoed merchant ships on supply runs to Europe.
We sunk a total of 17 ships. And I figured 12 were probably here in this area.
Walter Janek does not appear to be what he is, a former German Navy submariner who speaks with the drawl he acquired in an Oklahoma POW camp and who is now an American.
I fought for what was my country at the time. I would do the same thing for this country today.
Janek has a remarkable photo collection of the time his U-boat 67 prowled the Gulf, attacking ships between New Orleans and Galveston.
We were very relaxed out there because y'all wasn't really prepared for submarines being in your waters.
During the night, U-67 went hunting, its targets clearly silhouetted against the lights along the coast.
They were lit up, the ships. So you might say it was like shooting fish in the barrel.
Janek recalls frequently surfacing off Galveston and how peaceful it seemed, a stark contrast to wartime Germany.
We often joked about it, and we said, you know, we could go ashore and they probably never know we've been there.
But when Janek's sub attacked a ship convoy in mid-Atlantic, it finally got caught. These pictures were taken from the carrier-based U.S. Navy plane that attacked U-67 after depth charges forced it to surface.
A plane dropped out of the clouds, dropped 4 bombs, and this submarine was gone in 5 seconds. And 3 of us got out.
Janek and the others were picked up by this destroyer, taken to a U.S. interrogation camp, and set out the rest of the war as POWs in Oklahoma. Years later, Morris Grinstead, a crewman aboard the plane that bombed U-67, was tracked down near Dallas by Janek. They became close friends until Grinstead's death last winter. It was Grinstead who dropped life jackets into the water to Janek and his crewmates 46 years ago.
And of course, when we got sunk, y'all showed up, and luckily.
Yes, isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Now, Janek has made another contact with those days. For the first time, he's meeting with Bob Funk of Houston, who was aboard the destroyer that picked up Janek.
I'll tell you what, y'all were a welcome sight, I promise you that.
Well, I tell you, I've often wondered whatever happened to all of you, you know, after all these years, you know.
Oh, yeah. We were in the water around 4 hours, I guess.
It was a good bit because, you know, even after we got, you know, exhausted.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say bedraggled, but the word is exhausted. They were.
Well, I don't think
horrible.
it was just that. I think we were probably half scared to death,
You
too.
were frightened, yes.
You know.
And after all this time, 2 former enemies recall a moment in time they will always share.
That's a sight I'll never forget all my life. When they brought you aboard. That's.
Well, you know, they put out that little dinghy.
Yeah.
And that's what they picked us up with.
And I was standing up on the after deck house on the gun mount back there, looking down at you, and I looked at your faces, and I said, "Oh boy," you know, I'm glad that wasn't me. It was amazing. It was horrible.
You don't know the welcome sight that y'all were.
Yes.
Oh. This get-together is very meaningful because both men feel a relationship forming.
I do. I feel emotion.
I sort of feel a bond between us. It's hard to understand why we have wars when then things like that happen. You know, really 2 old enemies for all practical purposes. And we probably become the best of friends.
Yeah, that's true.
Texas POWs never returned to Germany. 140 are buried in a special cemetery at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio.
We did it.
From time to time, groups of former POWs have traveled back to Texas for reunions. The last one was held in Mejia in 1986. This summer, Arnold Kramer took a group of Texas A&M history students to Germany, where they visited a former Texas POW. Kramer was the first to chronicle this era.
I feel as though I found it in the nick of time.
Ida Blanchette, history professor at Alvin Community College, is writing a book about
World War II is not fully told yet, not until the history of all these camps are told.
Carl Blumenthal plans to retire soon. He lives in Asheville, North Carolina.
I don't think I would ever have come to the States as a permanent resident if I wouldn't have been here as a POW.
Walter Catwinkle still works. He lives in a Dallas suburb and is an American citizen.
There was a turning point in my life.
Walter Janik lives in Dallas. He's retired, travels a lot with his wife, and looks forward to seeing Bob Funk again.
Well, we'll get together Christmas and we'll look at some of these pictures and albums that we got.
I'm looking forward to it.
I do too. I really do.
The Eyes of Texas returns to its regular time slot next week with a celebration of 20 years on the air. Join the party, The Eyes of Texas, next Saturday night at 6:30 on Channel 2.
Take a Popeyes brown bag break for a